We are delving into a fresh anime expansion. We've already seen a few of these cards in some form, but we're now getting spruced up versions for the CCG version of Shadowverse. Today's cards: Demon Maestro and Infernal Orchestration. In the anime, Demon Conductor gave the leader a self-damaging effect and a card draw if the player's hand was empty. Wicked Conducting drew cards and evolved the entire board if the player was in Wrath. Quite potent. This higher rarity version is a bit different. There's no leader effect here, but it does deal 1 damage to your leader and draw a card with the same effect on last words. And if Wrath is activated, he gives you a new spell, Infernal Orchestration. And this spell is interesting even though it's a dramatic downgrade in both rarity and power. The closest comparison would probably be Wicked Rebirth, but without the reanimation. It's just card draw and rush with some stats, with the possible upside of 0 cost. As a follower, Demon Maestro is part of a recent trend, meta spells stapled onto followers with a few alterations, similar to how Chaos Wielder is a Fate's Hand on a stick. The Maestro's effect is Dark Contract on a body, with 1/2 delayed thanks to last words. This gives the opponent some room to interact with it via banish, silence, transformation, or steal effects. Not that those are seeing a lot of usage in the current metagame. An additional element to his last words is that it allows you to set up for Avarice by drawing the card at the start of the next turn. This does give him a bit broader versatility for the sorts of decks he can fit into. In board-based metas, he's going to be fairly reliable while also slowing down the opponent a bit. That said, with the low attack on the follower, he could still end up being ignored by certain decks, making the second draw tougher to trigger. Infernal Orchestration, incidentally, is not a token spell. You could, in theory, have up to 6 in your deck, with half of them 0 cost. Besides allowing you to turn Demon Maestro into a more substantial threat, you could also trade him on the same turn he's played at later stages, triggering his second half. But the 0 cost spells could also be saved for later and bigger turns when you need them more. This flexibility provides Demon Conductor with both early and late game utility, with the caveat that he's really only going to matter in a board-based metagame, or else he risks being ignored. Of course, if there are other ways to buff him and make him a more sizable threat, then obviously he could be straight up more powerful. Otherwise, he risks being a more conditional Dark Contract with a body. As for the spell on its own, it lacks the same utility that Wicked Rebirth has, as it can't feed into itself and thus into the rest of the overall strategy. So on its own, Infernal Orchestration doesn't have much use. The question to ask: do you want to spend a card slot on such an effect and draw it later into the game? As things stand, Wrathblood is hardly seeing any play, partly due to a hostile metagame, but also due to a lack of any substantial payoffs. In essence, it's a narrow deck that can't put up noticeable threats a lot of the time before getting hosed off the board, and Demon Maestro doesn't appear to offer any direct solutions. His Avarice trigger could be a way for Wrath and Avarice to mesh more consistently, which could be valuable depending on what sort of Avarice and Wrath payoff cards are printed. He's a body that can draw cards, trigger Avarice, and later on provide you with a free buff spell that has utility. But on his own, he simply isn't going to get the job done, especially not with Urias rotating out. Outside of Wrathblood, Demon Maestro's utility drops rapidly. Part of the issue is that Bloodcraft as a whole isn't particularly short on card draw, and not even on followers that can draw cards. Of course, the Avarice trigger could potentially land him a spot in an Evo deck to help trigger Demon Bodyguard and Kali more consistently. But do you really want to run him just for that purpose alone? In Handless Blood, he'd objectively make the deck worse. You're looking to empty your hand, not fill it. The only other possibility would be some type of Avarice-focused deck that isn't Evolve, but that appears unlikely considering that with anime cards, the focus will likely be on Wrath. As an enabler for both Avarice and Wrath, Demon Conductor has some potential, but his low stats combined with medium payoff means the card risks collecting dust, pun intended, depending on how the meta shapes up. If it's another combo-focused meta, like with Godworm, he risks just being too slow. In a more follower and tempo-oriented metagame, he might just come in handy. But ultimately, he's only ever going to be a middleman, never the one orchestrating the wins. Overall, we give Demon Maestro a B-. Infernal Orchestration is a handy spell in theory, but 1PP spells are notoriously prone to just ending up standing by the wayside unless they pack some serious punch. And this one does require 2 things to happen: a follower on your board sticking around, and an enemy follower for the rush half to make sense. So already the spell has a lot of limitations limitations. Additionally, it is basically a dead draw on turn 1, so there's a good chance that it won't see much usage outside of being generated by Demon Maestro as a 0 PP spell. Later in the game, once Wrath is triggered, it is an effective card cycle, but will that be enough to keep it? Overall, we give Infernal Orchestration a D+. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next month.